In Norway, sometimes children's carnivals are cancelled because boys pick boyish costumes and girls pick girly costumes. If you think that's bad, then you would be wrong. For such infringements of the authority upon children's entitlement to have fun is not viewed as wrong by the scholars of the nation. What is viewed as wrong is that the society isn't forced through the power of the state to listen and believe when an 8-year-old boy says he's a girl. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Now, back in July last year, I made a video about the Norwegian authorities' intention to lower the minimum age of allowing legal sex change from 18 down to 7. Yes, 7. Now, I encourage you to watch this video so you'd have a broader understanding of this topic. Essentially, the idea uttered back then manifested into a bill now under discussion. Now, things have taken so long partly because of the legal process is in itself slow, but also because there is discontentment with the bill. But not from normal, sane people, but from progressives who think that the bill simply is not good enough. So, to signal the progressive disapproval, Elise Kopang-Freud, Senior Executive Officer of the Department of Public and International Law at the University of Oslo, has decided to write a long article published on the Faculty of Law's website. Now, the article is quite long, and I'll read most of it since it's in Norwegian and I don't expect most of the audience to be able to read it. Although in this case I would have probably read it in full even if it had been in English, since the underlying mentality of the author and her supporters is so twisted and bizarre that you'd have to see it and hear it in order to even comprehend that such mentality exists. So, it goes like this, quote, "Trans children need judicial recognition." Oh boy. Children in Norway face daily challenges when their legal sex is inconsistent with their gender identity. In Norway, children are not allowed to change their sex before they're 18 years old, but a new bill is on the horizon. You might not think of it in everyday life, but you have a legal sex. This appears in your passport and your social security number. In Norway, the third number of the last 5 digits of your social security number is essential. If you have an even number, then you are legally a lady, and if you have an odd number, you are legally a gentleman. The rationale for creating a sex field in the passport was to be able to identify us. Trans person is an umbrella term for people who have an appearance or identity that expresses a different sex than what was recorded for them at birth. If transgender people want to change their legal sex, they have a long way to go. What does it take to change one's legal sex? In order to change one's legal status in this regard in Norway today, there are some criteria that must be met. There are 4 conditions to be met for one to be considered eligible for changing one's legal sex. These are included in the sex change treatment guidelines offered by the National Treatment Service for Transsexualism. Gender affirmative treatment implies that firstly you must get a diagnosis made by a psychologist or psychiatrist as transsexual. Another condition is that you must undergo hormone therapy. A third condition is surgery. You must have removed the testicles or uterus when you have sex surgery. The fourth condition is reality experience. You need to have lived at least 12 months in line with your new gender identity. The tax administration then assigns new identity numbers when the National Treatment Service for Transsexualism confirms that the person has undergone complete sex change treatment. Anniken Sørli from the Department of Public Law at the University of Oslo is a researcher on transgender people. She says that not everyone wants or needs complete sex change treatment, which involves the requirement for surgery. As things stand today, they do not have a real choice, as complete sex change treatment is the only road that leads to legal status in line with their gender identity and a full life, says Sørli. Much has been researched and discussed about how adult transgenders are experiencing challenges related to their attempts to change their legal sex. Shirley wanted to also gain insight into young people's lives as trans children. Shirley interviewed 3 families of transgender children. Through getting into the children's stories, Shirley wanted to learn how the legal status and current practice of changing the legal status may affect children's lives and their sense of recognition. The stories that are analyzed are just examples of how legal status and current conditions for change of that legal status may be experienced. The goal hasn't been to generalize the findings, but to highlight the lives behind. Stories about transgender children should be seen in light of the current situation in Norway, where children do not have any opportunity to change their legal sex, stresses Shirley. Professor Anne Hellum at the University of Oslo has many years of experience in research of discrimination and equality law. It is important to conduct research that shows the experiences of the children in this issue. They are ordinary people who face challenges in their daily lives, for example in gym class at school. This is the old women's rights method, to base everything on lived experience, and it is a good research method also on children's matters, says Helium. Now, listen to this phrase again. This is the old women's rights method, to base everything on lived experiences, and it is a good research method also on children's matters. Folks, this is Tumblr in real life. Listen and believe. Lived experience trumps data, reason, logic, and everything else. A deluded 7-year-old girl who thinks she's a boy is more important than changing large swaths of law to accommodate that. Anyway, back to the article. The families I interviewed said that their children's birth sex does not match their gender identity. These children often experience problems related to their legal sex, says Shirley. The kids could have possibly felt recognized to a greater extent if the state had not demanded complete sex change treatment and simultaneously gave the kids a greater opportunity to determine their own legal sex, she wonders. Trans children need recognition by the Norwegian state in terms of the ability to change their legal sex. As it is today, children must be of legal age before they are allowed to change their legal sex, adds Shirley. It is important to issue position based on the lives of these children, says Helium. Then it is easy to understand where and how the lack of recognition intervenes in their lives, as well as develop ways on how can they be helped to achieve greater legal and social recognition so they can be who they are when they go to school, she emphasizes. In a new bill that it is now proposed that children from 16 years of age onwards would be able to change their legal sex and name, and that children between 7 and 16 years of age to be able to change their legal sex and name if both parents agree. The ministry proposes to bring the possibility to change one's legal status independent of diagnosis and other medical conditions. The only condition for this change to be allowed is that the person is experiencing belonging to the other sex, then the person is registered in the National Register. It should only require a declaration. This will be a fundamental strengthening of the individual's self-determination, says Shirley. She thinks it is a positive aspect that children down to 7 years will be given the opportunity to change their legal sex, as it says in the bill. But the ministry's proposal for a minimum age of 7 years appears little thought out. The same applies to the requirement of parental consent for children between 7 and 16 years. If the bill goes through, what happens if parents and children disagree? More so, the bill doesn't contain the possibility of a third entity, which could have settled the matter better, says Shirley. A number of consultative bodies have pointed out this deficiency and wanted a clear children's perspective. The Children's Ombudsman has also questioned the Health and Care Department's justification that in cases where parents and children disagree would be most prudent to wait until the child turns 16. The Ombudsman asks the question to whom the ministry believes it will be most prudent for. So, the Children's Ombudsman doesn't understand to whom it is most prudent to wait till the age of 16? Really? Why does Norway even have a Children's Ombudsman anyway, if they can't even grasp sensible things like these? It's no wonder that the Child Protective Services, the Barnevernet, get to do whatever they please. With such a public defender of children, it's free for all, really. Look, I know this is getting long, but this is so absurd that one needs to hear it to believe it. A few more paragraphs. Quote, "In today's society, we have a fingerprint-based passports to identify Norwegian citizens. Do we then need a legal sex or a sex field in the passport? No," says Anniken Sørli. "A problem with sex-specific identification and the bill is that children who do not have parents who support them in their required need to change their legal status are left standing without the possibility to change their legal sex and are being prevented from living fully in accordance with their gender identity. Lowering the age limit for change of the legal sex will therefore only be a good solution for some of the children concerned, but not for those kids who do not have parents who support them," she says. The tax administration has gone flat on assigning identity numbers and have recommended the introduction of sex-neutral birth numbers. To reflect this in passports, the sex field can be filled with X or unspecified. This is what happens when you let ideologues speak. You see, fingerprints tell you the sex and the race of the person anyway, bimbo. Anyway, we can imagine a solution where no child is given a legal status before he or she has defined his sex, and where unspecified there should be an alternative for people who do not define themselves within the sex model also later in life, says Sørli. And if you look lower in the article, it has references. Because, you see, these are top-notch intellectuals as opposed to us plebs who do not have multiple letters past our names. And given that we live in a world that glorifies journals as if they're some sort of authority, these idiots' position will probably be given credence over normative common sense that is inherent in the overwhelming majority of the planet. But let's look at the references a bit. So it's Anne Hellum, Special Issue Human Rights, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Nordic Journal of Human Rights, January 2016. Yes, very progressive. Then we have Anniken Sørli, Legal Gender Meets Reality, a Socio-Legal Children's Perspective, Nordic Journal of Human Rights, in January 2016. And it has a DOI there, and you have to pay $41 just to read this particular article. Isn't it lovely? And then there is one in Norwegian which reads Anniken Sørli, The Right to Gender Identity as a Human Right. It's a thesis from the Department of Women's Law, part of the Department of Public Law, University of Oslo, 2013, published in the journal Female Legal Papers, and if you click on that you get a PDF of 164 pages. Now, I won't read 164 pages on why we should listen and believe when 8-year-old girls tell us they're really boys. Sorry, my tolerance has limits. But seriously, the Department of Women's Law and the Female Legal Papers Journal, all paid by the taxpayers of course, my obvious first question is, why such drivel even exists in the first place? Why do complete morons like Anniken Sørli even have a job on the back of the taxpayers? What possible value could she and her disdainful drivel bring to the world through stupidities like female legal papers? Why is there such thing? And, of course, the equivalent male legal papers doesn't even exist. When I googled Skriftserie, Google kept on asking me if I wasn't meaning to look for the female one, because the idea of a male legal papers journal has never crossed anyone's mind. And for good reason, because it's stupid, just as stupid as the idea of a female legal papers journal. What's next? Tranny legal papers journal? Because you wouldn't want to be cis-normative and oppressive now, wouldn't you? Universitetet I Oslo. The reason I'm spending that much time on this academic drivel is because most of the checks and balances meant to protect children from this insanity have been taken down in the last 6 months, and that's a big problem. Particularly in maximal socialist states like Norway, where the state can take your child away because potato without any due process. I'll leave a link in the low bar with a very long article by NY Mag titled How the Fight Over Transgender Kids Got a Leading Sex Researcher Fired, which I suggest you read it in full. Basically, the chief of the gender identity clinic in Toronto was fired because he didn't toe the politically correct gender-bending party line. His decades-proven method was deemed offensive and oppressive, because it's 2016. Essentially, this guy refused the so-called gender affirmative care as a solution for sexually confused children and rather preferred a more conservative method of first figuring out whether the children even had any disorder to begin with, or if they may not actually be, just kids. In doing so, he got on the radar of the infamous and strong tranny lobby, which works under the listen and believe ideology. Whereas this clinic insisted that political ideology should not be applied to science. Now, why does this clinic in Toronto matters and how it ties to the article we just read? Well, it matters because at an international level, there are fewer and fewer clinics that actually conduct research with the purpose of actually helping the patient when it comes to sexually confused children. Most of these ones, especially the big ones like the one in Toronto, have been shut down one by political activists and replaced, well, with political activist institutions. In doing so, in the following years, you will see more and more of such advocacy to quickly get to editing history, birth certificates and stuff, and stuff our children with hormones, because little Anna says she's a boy and little Tommy wanted a wig the other day at Walmart. This is in no way a small thing. Remember what I said in the video about Swedish liberals. What happens in Scandinavia in terms of progressivist degeneracy tends to slowly spread to other, bigger countries. Also, remember that the whole application of the political ideology that you can actually change your sex started in Denmark. So whereas now many just laugh or shrug it off when they hear what happens in Norway, you should think again. In 10-15 years' time, this will come to your national parliament or legislature. Politics follows culture. And the culture is already inundated with laudative stories of transgender children. And they're also getting younger, and this is the biggest problem. Because whereas you can argue that, 15 or 16-year-old is old enough, after all, many European countries allow and have been allowing for centuries marriage from the age of 15, things get very messy when we get to 3 or 4-year-olds or 7-year-olds. 5 years ago, there was 1 or 2 cultural productions about transgender children, mainly an episode at the Tyra show. Now, I was able to find 20 of them just with a simple search for transgender children on YouTube, all uploaded in the last 15 months, and most from big names like ABC, BBC, Cosmopolitan, CBS, that kind of outlets. So you see, while you may laugh or dismiss as irrelevant, this thing is coming to your nations. It's just that Norway is ahead of the curve a little bit. So with all the checks and balances removed and with the culture already set up to normalize and reinforce the sexual confusion of children, expect this issue to grow. And ignoring it won't make it go away. You see, that's the problem with conservatives. They just ignore these things as if they're not important. While your children are being taught that saying you're a girl makes you a girl, and that's a fact. So, you see, ignore this at your own expense. And you know what's even worse? It's that this stupidity is not even in line with the old narrative of the so-called gay liberation. All this does is pressure, for instance, effeminate gay boys to transition into girls, and butch or tomboy girls to transition into boys. So instead of liberating them, this progressivist bullshit is placing additional burdens of intolerance upon them. Do you know who else does that? Iran. Yes, Iran. In Iran, effeminate gay men are under a tremendous amount of pressure to mutilate themselves, to transition into women. The Iranian government even pays for half of the procedure. I'm not joking. Iran is the country that makes the second most sex change surgeries after, of course, Thailand, where effeminate gay men are also under a similar pressure, though enforced slightly less harsh than in Iran. Since we are at the topic of Iran, the idea of sex change as a human right is quite popular among the Islamic scholars in Iran and has the blessing of Ayatollah Khomeini. You know, that rumor that said that most, if not all, of the Iran's women's football team are men? Well, that is also true, in a way. At least 4 players were indeed men, and another 4 are still uncertain, though one should also consider that the editing of history and documents is common and legal in Iran. But not even in Iran do they permit 7-year-olds to go willy-nilly to change their legal sex and enforce listen and believe upon everyone. Neither is Thailand, the country that made a fortune and an entire industry from the sexual confusion of gullible fools all over the world. Now, you know my position. If you want to alter your body to look like the opposite sex, knock yourself out. It's not my body, so I don't even have to care. But this should be reserved to people who actually own their bodies. We call these people adults. I would even agree with the standard set at the age of 16 rather than 18, since in most of Europe 15-year-olds can get married and the age of consent is usually 14 or 15. So yeah, why shouldn't they be able to make such decisions at 16? No matter how wrong I may think they are, and I do think they're wrong. But when we get into the field of children, this should absolutely not be allowed. It is absolutely insane to suggest that a 7-year-old girl is oppressed because her birth certificate says girl while she likes to play cowboys and Indians and thinks she's a boy. Even more insane is to silence through political activism and anti-science brute force any voice that says, hold on a second, are we even sure we know enough about these things? Let's wait some more, let's see if we can fix this without surgeries and chemicals. Equally insane is to start stuffing hormone blockers and other chemicals into 10 or 11-year-olds because it's 2016 and listen and believe, which happens more and more often, sadly. Anyway, that's it for now, but this is a topic that will keep on coming because the progressivists have, at least for now, silenced most of its opposition, so it is thus expected from them to go even more hardline now that they are largely unopposed. And with that being said, thank you for watching and supporting this channel. See you soon on Freedom Alternative.